Hello and welcome to another edition of Mr. Popper's Penguins with Mrs.Matuza. Sorry, it's been a while. Couldn't find the book in the mess that's my house recently. So last time we left off, the Penguins had gone across country to Seattle to start their 10-week tour. Now remember, all the people thought they were hysterical, especially when Monsieur Duval was going across the tightrope, that would be the word, and the Penguins would go underneath and would laugh almost at him. They'd, with their beaks, move around, and everyone thought it was really funny because they'd come out and disturb the other acts. So now we are on chapter 17 called Fame. The birds soon became so famous that whenever it was known that the Popper performing penguins were to appear in any theater, the crowds would stand in line for half a mile down the street waiting their turn to buy tickets. The other actors on the program were not always so pleased, however. Once in Minneapolis, a celebrated lady opera singer got very much annoyed when she heard that the Popper penguins were to appear on the same program. In fact, she refused to go on stage unless the penguins were put away. So the stagehands helped Mr. and Mrs. Popper and the children get the birds off the stage and downstairs to the basement under the stage, while the manager guarded the stage entrance to make sure that the penguins did not get past. Well, down in the basement, the birds soon discovered another little flight of steps going up, and in another minute the audience was shrieking with laughter as the penguins had suddenly appeared one by one in the orchestra pit, where the musicians were playing. The musicians kept on playing, and the lady kept on singing, and when she saw the penguins, sang all the louder to show how angry she was. The audience was laughing so hard that nobody could hear the words of her song. Mr. Popper, who had followed the penguins up on the stairs, stopped when he realized that it led to the orchestra pit. I don't think I'm supposed to go up there with the musicians, he told Mrs. Popper. Yeah, well, the penguins did, said Mrs. Popper. You better go get those birds before they start biting the pegs and strings off those fiddles, said Bill. Oh, dear, I just don't know what to do, said Mr. Popper, sitting down helplessly at the top step. Then I will catch the penguins, said Mrs. Popper, climbing up past him with Janie and Bill following. When they saw Mrs. Popper coming after him, the penguins felt so guilty because they knew they did not belong there that they jumped up on the stage, ran over the footlights, and hid under the singing lady's blue dress. That stopped the singing altogether, except for one high, shrill note that had not been written in the music. The birds loved the bright lights of the theater and the great laughing audiences and all the traveling. There was always something new to see. From Stillwater out to the Pacific coast they traveled. It was a long way now to their little house at Proudfoot Avenue, where the Poppers used to have to worry about their money if it would hold out until spring. And every week, they got a check for $5,000. When they were not actually playing in some theater or traveling on trains between cities, their life was spent in the larger hotels. Now and then a startled hotel keeper would object to having the birds register there. Why, we don't even allow lap dogs in this hotel, he would say. Yes, but do you have any rule against penguins? Well, then the hotel keeper would have to admit that there was no rule about penguins, and of course, when he saw how neat the penguins were and how the other guests came to the hotel in hopes of seeing them, he was very glad to have them. You might think that a large hotel would offer a great many opportunities for mischief for a lot of the penguins, but they behaved pretty well. On the whole, never doing anything worse than riding up and down the elevators and occasionally biting off the brass buttons off the bellboys' uniforms. $5,000 a week may sound like a great deal of money, and yet the Poppers were far from rich. It was quite expensive to live in the grand hotels and travel about town in taxis. Mr. Popper often thought that the penguins could have just well walked back and forth between the hotels and theaters, but in every one of their walks ended up looking like a parade, and they always tied up traffic. So Mr. Popper, who never liked to be a nuisance to anyone, always took taxis instead. It was expensive to have large cakes of ice brought up to their hotel rooms to cool the penguins. The bills in the fine restaurants where the Poppers often took their meals were dreadfully high. Fortunately, however, the penguins' food had stopped being an expense to them. On the road, they'd given up having tanks of large fish shipped to them because it was so hard to get deliveries on time. So they went back to feeding the birds on canned shrimps. This cost them absolutely nothing, for Mr. Popper had written a testimonial saying, "Popper's performing penguins thrive on Owen's oceanic shrimp." This statement with a picture of the 12 penguins was now printed all over the leading magazines, and Owen's Oceanic Shrimp Company gave Mr. Popper an order that was good for free cans of shrimps at any grocery store anywhere in the country. Several other companies, such as the Great Western Spinach Growers Association and the Energetic Breakfast Oats Company, wanted him to recommend their products too and offered him large sums of money. But the penguins simply refused to eat spinach or oats, and Mr. Popper was much too honest to say that they would, even though he knew they could really use the money. From the Pacific coast, they turned east again to cross the continent. They had time enough on this brief tour to touch only the larger cities. After Minneapolis, they went to Milwaukee, Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, and Philadelphia. Wherever they went, their reputation traveled ahead of them. When early in April, they reached Boston. Huge crowds awaited in the railway station. Up to now, it had not been too difficult to keep the birds comfortable. But their warm spring wind was blowing across Boston Common, and at the hotel, Mr. Popper had to have ice brought up to his room in 1,000-pound cakes. He was glad that the 10-week contract was almost up, and that next week, when the birds were to appear in New York, it was their last. Already, Mr. Greenbaum was writing about a new contract, and Mr. Popper was beginning to think, however, that he had better be getting back to Stillwater, for the penguins were growing irritable. What does irritable mean? Remember? Annoyed? Probably. They're probably, after all that traveling of 10 weeks, getting a little tired. I know I would get tired. Well, the next chapter is called April Winds. So remember, it's starting to get warm. Penguins don't like warm. They're getting tired. They're cranky. So think about what's going to happen next. See you next time.